but we will continue to do that. We will use our air power as needed to protect coalition forces in our partnered operations, and we haven't had a repeat of that in the last few days. And again, as I think you heard my colleague Captain Davis make clear last week, we would continue to advise the Syrian regime to steer clear of those areas.
You can't just say whether there are combat air patrols that are being flown continuously over that area to keep them out.
I'm just going to make clear that we're going to continue to provide the air support we need for our coalition forces and our partnered operations to make sure that they are as safe as possible in Syria.
Not a no-fly zone?
It's not a no-fly zone. But I would just, again, reiterate what you heard from Captain Davis last week and what you'll hear from me again, that the Syrian regime would be wise to avoid areas where coalition forces have been operating. And we will continue to defend them, and if need be, we will send aircraft again to defend our forces.
Does it also apply to defending the allied Syrian Democratic forces that are on the ground there?
Bob, we will continue to support coalition forces and our partnered operations on the ground in Syria, as we've said previously. Yes, Tara.
Thanks. Just to follow up on Bob's question, is Russia being used as a conduit to communicate to the Syrian Air Force to back off, or is there direct communication to the Syrian Air Force from the U.S. side? Yeah, I think as we pointed out last week, we did engage through our memorandum of understanding with the Russians, specifically after that instance, to have them communicate to the Syrian regime our concerns about what had happened and the fact that it shouldn't happen again. And we will continue to use that as a resource given the Russian relationship with the Syrians. But we are also prepared to engage directly, communicate directly if needed, in order to avoid these kinds of situations in the first place. Our goal is not to have this kind of situation happen in the first place. So the second incident, there was also a communication through Russia to the Syrians, or just to U.S. aircraft were?
My understanding, there were efforts to communicate between the aircraft, but when our aircraft arrived in the area, the Syrian aircraft departed.
A separate topic?
Sure.
Today, the U.S. forces Afghanistan announced that 100 U.S. troops were sent to Lashkar in Helmand province to help secure that area. But less than, I think, 2 weeks ago, or a little over 2 weeks ago, General Nicholson had briefed us that Helmand province was largely cleared and that the 215th Corps had done a good job under with the advise and assist of U.S. forces. So it's a little confusing how there had been a lot of progress made and Helmand was largely cleared, but all of a sudden Lashkar is in a state of, in a threatened state that requires additional U.S. forces to be sent there.
Yeah, I don't recall General Nicholson's exact description of the situation, but let me tell you, first of all, what these troops are doing. There's, as you said, about 100 troops in expeditionary advisory package in total. They've been sent first to provide train, advise, and assist to the police zone headquarters there in Lashkar, and second to provide force protection for those actually doing the advising. So some of these forces are there to protect those forces, and they were all done under the Resolute Support Mission. They've gone down there to assist the police zone headquarters and their leadership team with a focused train, advise, and assist mission looking largely at the force protection issue, and this will not be a permanent presence. They will return to their base at some point. Getting back to your larger question about Helmand province, I think that what General Nicholson has made clear is that there still are challenges in Afghanistan. There are dangerous places in Afghanistan, but we continue to support Afghan forces that have shown progress and resiliency in recent months, including in Helmand province. And this reflects, again, our support for their efforts. And there are going to be setbacks along the way. I think General Nicholson was pretty clear about that. But in terms of the ANDSF forces and their performance, I think he feels good about where they are. But certainly there's room for improvement, and there are going to be setbacks along the way. And part of that effort will be to, again, reinforce them in areas, particularly in Afghanistan, where they have seen some setbacks, and that's Helmand's one of them. Joe.
Could you explain to us what has changed in the rules of engagement with the Syrian regime? You're saying that the Syrian regime is being asked to stay or to avoid flying over the areas where the SDF and the Kurds are. In another way, you are putting like no-fly zones inside Syria.
Joe, what I'm doing is sorry, go ahead.
Explain to us what's the difference between asking the Syrian regime to avoid flying over Hasaka and Manbij and applying
Sure, and I think it's consistent with where we've been in the past, Joe. We've said repeatedly that we would defend coalition forces on the ground for one, and we would continue to defend our partnered operations. And that is an area in which we've been active. We've been clear about that. And so we're going to continue to defend our forces in that area. We're going to tell the Syrians and anyone else who may threaten our forces in that area, we will defend them. And they have a right to defend themselves as well.
Do you think the Syrian regime has the right to fly over its territory?
We are fighting ISIL. We have, again, forces on the ground supporting our partnered forces who are engaged in that fight, and we will defend our forces.
Last question. The policy that you are talking about in Hasaka and in Manbij, this could be implemented on other areas, for example, in Aleppo, for example?
We will continue to defend our forces in our fight against ISIL, as you know, and we will, as our forces move in Syria and continue their partnered operations, we will do what we need to do to protect our forces. As you know, we have not been operating in all parts of Syria, and so there are limitations to where we're going because our forces are not everywhere in Syria.
Have you been in touch with the Syrian regime through third party, for example? And what's the response?
As I mentioned, we communicated through the Russians to explain our concerns about what happened last week, and we think that was communicated effectively.
Are you okay with that?
You'll have to check with the Syrian regime. Christina.
Thanks, Peter. With the Kurdish YPG fighting Syrian forces on the ground, is there will the U.S. forces on the ground also be supporting the SDF against the regime on the ground? And if not, is there any concern that U.S. forces on the ground might get pulled into the fight between the YPG and Syrian forces?
Christina, as you know, our fight and our focus is with ISIL, and we'll continue to conduct ourselves on the ground in those partnered operations focused on ISIL. And we're going to continue to take the steps we need to make sure that our forces remain as safe as possible in that effort. And they will continue to stay focused on ISIL as they have been the last few days, even after this event.
So the action is just via air against the Syrian regime, not...
I'm not going to get into everything we're doing to protect our forces on the ground, but the one way we can do that is to advise people to stay away from our forces, and that's what we've done in this instance. Barbara.
A couple of things to circle back. You said a minute ago that you were going to protect partnered operations on the ground. So straight up, is the warning to the Syrian regime to keep its aircraft out also include keep them away from your SDF partners on the ground, or just U.S. troops? Does this protection, you said partnered operations, so does it extend to you are going to protect the SDF from the Syrian Air Force?
We've been clear, Barbara, from the start that our focus is on ISIL. The forces that are taking the fight to ISIL and partnered with us will enjoy the support of the United States. And
yes, that your aircraft are going to protect SDF.
We're going to continue. We're not going to get into our rules of engagement, Barbara. We're going to continue to support and protect and provide that military support for our coalition forces and our partnered operations, our coalition partnered operations on the ground.
My next question is on Aleppo. You said that, the discussions, I'm paraphrasing slightly, you said about it couldn't go on forever, right? I think those were the words you used. And you're not there, I think you also indicated you're just not there yet with the Russians. So what is if it can't go on forever and you're not there with the Russians, it's not a hypothetical question. You lay out that it can't go on, these discussions can't, you're not going to wait forever. What's your answer on Aleppo? What can you do? Or is the only answer, if it doesn't work out with the Russian negotiations, to keep the status quo in the Aleppo situation? Is there anything else other than an agreement with the Russians that you're not there yet, or status quo?
Well, there are lots of things that could happen in Aleppo that don't require the United States. There's a lot that the regime could do, that the Russians could do to, well, let me be clear that the responsibility, Barbara, lies with those who are carrying out this bombing campaign, and that's right now the Syrian regime and the Russians, and there are steps that they could take to try and ease the situation there, and I think we and our U.S. government partners have made that clear to them at every step. We'd like to ease the suffering of the Syrian people. We'd all like to see that. And the engagement with the Russians, one of the goals, of course, has been to try and achieve that. And we remain, and our colleagues at the State Department, led by Secretary Kerry, continue to engage with the Russians to achieve exactly that end. And the larger goal here, of course, Barbara, is to resolve the situation in Syria peacefully, to get a political resolution to something that cannot be solved militarily.
But you are indicating today that the Pentagon is just not there yet on this. So
I don't think it's just the Pentagon. I think it's certainly our our colleagues at the State Department and elsewhere who would like to see the Russians change their behavior.
So what's right? Doesn't appear to be happening. So what's Plan B for the administration if you cannot get an agreement with the Russians and the Syrians? What's your Plan B for Aleppo?
We're going to stay focused for now, Barbara, on Plan A, which is to continue to engage the Russians, continue to urge that steps be taken to ease the situation in Aleppo, the very dire situation that I think we've all seen play out on our TV screens the last couple of days. This is a very serious situation, a serious humanitarian situation that could be eased, and we will continue to take steps that we think are appropriate to try and achieve that.
Can I just very quickly ask one other topic on North Korea? With the U.S. military exercise starting now, and the North Koreans, as usual, with their rhetoric about threatening attacks against the coalition, against the South Koreans, what's the assessment of this department in terms of just the usual rhetoric and, sort of brush it aside? Or is there anything with the North Koreans right now, their missile testing program, their nuclear program, their rhetoric that is causing you particular concern?
I don't think we brush anything aside with regard to North Korea, Barbara, and we obviously watch the situation very closely. The reason for this exercise, as you know, it's an exercise that's been in place since 1976, an annual exercise, is to demonstrate again, our commitment to the South Koreans. It's to train in terms of defensive actions that might need to be taken, and it is prudent planning on the part of our forces there, and of course the South Korean forces, to make sure we're doing everything possible. But it is an annual exercise. We have seen the rhetoric from North Korea. We've seen that rhetoric in the past, and of course we would urge the North Koreans to do what they can to ease tensions in the Korean Peninsula, and that's certainly something we would welcome. Hold on, I'll go to Aaron and move over.
Thanks, Peter. Just to clarify, you said these can't go on indefinitely, these discussions. So is there a date, a rough timeline that this building says, at this point, we have to break off discussions and find that Plan B?
We're not going to put a calendar deadline on it. I'll defer to Secretary Kerry, who's leading this effort very admirably in trying to move this process along. He's been, obviously, I'll leave it to the State Department to characterize it, but had tireless efforts to try and make this happen, and we will continue to support his efforts. But at some point, if we don't see progress, again, there's not going to be a resolution here, and we think there is an opportunity to ease the situation in Aleppo, but more importantly, Aaron, to address the wider situation. There is an opportunity for Russia to use its significant influence with the Assad regime, and we have yet to see them demonstrate a willingness to do that. And so for now, the suffering of the Syrian people continues.
So just aside to that, the